The Eye of Horus, a DMT trip report by Anonymous, posted to earwid.org, May 14th, 2020. I've had a small amount of DMT that I've kept around for quite a while now, probably a year. I got it from a very reliable friend who managed to procure it online. I've been interested in having this experience for a long time, and I felt like I had done enough personal research to know, at least somewhat, what I could expect. I've been a long-time fan and listener of the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, and have heard Joe, as well as multiple guests, talk about their positive, mind-altering, perspective-shifting experiences with this obscure, mystical, and intriguing drug. I had also seen the Rick Strassman documentary, The Spirit Molecule, several times in recent years, and had been interested in having a visionary experience of my own. I wanted my first experience to be with ayahuasca, perhaps in the native setting in the Amazon, with a shaman. But I grew impatient, and decided it was time to just take the plunge and try smoking the DMT I already had sitting in my medicine cabinet for so very, very long. I would say that I've had enough psychedelic experiences in my life, both positive and negative, with many different substances, including multiple trips using psilocybin and LSD, that I can say I'm an experienced psychonaut. However, nothing I've ever felt could have prepared me for this. Because of the implications and stories I had heard, as well as my last experience with LSD, I was afraid of it for a long time, hence why I had it sitting around for so long. Probably spurred by my most recent LSD trip, which to say the least was not a positive experience, but that's for a whole other story. The important thing is, during that ill-fated trip, I went to a place where I never, ever wanted to go again. My friend had told me I needed to vaporize it with a torch and an oil pipe way back when I first got it from him, and being that I never have used meth or smoked crack, I had to go out and get one. So on a Tuesday evening, after a long day at work, I went to a local gas station where I knew they would sell oil pipes, and got myself the pipe and a small disposable torch lighter, which was embarrassing to say the least. And then I went home to prepare. At this point, I should mention that I have a prescription for Adderall, which I take intermittently for work, and had taken 30 milligrams earlier that day, probably about 6 hours before the experience. This may have had an effect on the experience, but I can't be sure. Suffice to say, I did not think about it being an issue. I'd heard many stories, and almost all of the good ones were people who said they had a good friend, or friends around them, to help them through the experience. I wish so badly in retrospect that I'd heeded the advice of the countless travellers who had come before me. The problem was I couldn't ask my roommate, because he's not into this sort of thing, and every friend who I had broached the subject with seemed uncomfortable with the idea. So, being the fearless, adventurous type that I am, I read a few accounts online for a bit about people trying it by themselves, and after a little while, I decided I'd be okay to try it by myself. Which really was my biggest mistake. My friend also told me that the yellow crystalline powder he had wrapped up in a tiny square of tinfoil was about enough for 4 doses. So, I went by that estimation and sectioned about 1/4 of the amount I had, scooped it into the pipe using a small nail file, and I made my bed and propped up some pillows. I put on a YouTube video of some binaural beats, accompanied by ambient music and visualization graphics, which I thought would be cool and trippy to go along with the DMT. These binaural beats use differing frequencies played under soft music, and are meant to induce deep relaxation and meditation by forcing your brain into oscillating theta waves. I was feeling calm and relaxed, albeit I could have possibly still been a little stressed from the long day at work. I turned down the lights and set a small candle unlit that had a glass container where I was planning on putting the pipe as soon as I exhaled, as I'd heard the effects were so fast that often you forget the thing you're holding is a hot piece of glass. Session 1, 10:05 PM, April 28th, 2015. I sat with my back propped up on the pillows I'd arranged along the headboard and put the glass candle in front of me, sparking the torch. I'd never smoked out of an oil pipe before, so it was a bit confusing at first. I fumbled with the torch for a bit, but managed to get a few small rips and held them in for just a second each, and immediately tasted that awful, metallic, plastic-like vapour as exhaled. And then heard what I can only describe as the sound a transformer makes when morphing states and changing. It was loud and shrill and seemed to be coming from inside my skull. Not like in my mind, but literally resonating from the base of my neck and reverberating inside the walls of my skull. My vision changed, got darker, and seemed to condense and contort in a perfectly symmetrical way, like space bending in the center. And I remember putting down the pipe and just trying to focus on the trippy visualizations on the screen. At this point, I could still tell I was in my room and was aware of everything around me. My whole room was warped. And then the vibration started. Low at first, but then louder. Vibrating, resonating, oscillation, as if space-time were sound waves coming out of a subwoofer, but the speaker was me. It was coming out of my very center. Not my body, but my consciousness. By now, I was still awake and aware of my surroundings, so I decided before it was all gone and wasted, that I should try to take another, fuller hit. I'd heard from many testimonials that the true experience feels like you break through and you just go elsewhere. Still being in a warped daze, I hurriedly unfolded the foil and dosed out about a third of what was left in it, wrapped it back up, and set it aside. Then, I sparked the torch and ripped it again, hard as fuck this time, and then held in the vapour as long as I could. Before I could even exhale, I felt and heard a deafening loud pop and sizzle, like one of those old photographic flashbulbs, followed immediately by a mechanical whoosh sound. In an instant, my vision warped into what can only describe as a tunnel of fractal light and sound, as my entire consciousness and physical form imploded and was sucked into a black hole the size of a pin. I could feel my form exploding and being ripped away atom by atom as was rocketed backwards across the universe, across infinite space as brightly lit as the sun. It was like that feeling you get at the top of a sky-high roller coaster as you teeter off the edge and plunge into the abyss. Only it was backwards, faster than light, curving and undulating into infinite Escher-like loops of this one singular infinite moment. I immediately felt pure terror and realised that I had taken too much, and that there was no stopping it now. I was rocketing toward the empty dark void I somehow knew was fast approaching behind me. I think at this point I must have started screaming, but my voice was absorbed into the whirring, mechanical banging of the deafening sound all around me, coursing through me. It sounded like in the movie The Matrix, when Neo gets his whole body consumed by the metallic liquid and his scream turns into warbled nothingness. I could see things, images in the blur, as I continued to fall deeper and deeper. And I remember yelling, "What the fuck is going on?" But my voice was still cut down by the broken, warbled sound as it stuttered off, disappearing into the void. The images and forms were distorted, escaping description, but still infinitely amazing. But because I was facing backwards, I could only see what had already passed. There were snippets from my life, visions of things I had done, people I've hurt, and regretful decisions I've made. But it was all simultaneous, like a feeling of pure dark energy, concentrated like darkness. It was a morphing cloud-like entity that seemed to be aware of me, and part of me at the same time. I can only describe it as being made up of all the worst parts of myself, the worst experiences I've ever felt, the darkest emotions. However, this thing was aware, and it spoke to me. Not in English, but I could understand its meaning. This entity of sorts showed me over and over again all the mistakes I have ever made, and I was convinced of its intent. It wanted to keep me there, locked in this infinite dark loop of time, forever being ripped apart and reassembled and falling endlessly. All the while, being shown my own sins on a never-ending feedback loop of static torment. This darkened, morphing, infinite construct was a prison of my own making. I could hear, or maybe more like feel, 1,000 different, distinct voices all around me screaming. Not saying, but screaming my name over and over again all around me, through me. And I knew that I'd put myself into this place for the rest of time. This was my punishment for coming to this place unprepared, for trying to understand what I had no hope of comprehending until the universe had decided it was my time to die. Then, the voices all around me shifted from 1,000 into 100, then 20. Then just one voice yelling my name. The shrill mechanical banging turned into a knock at the door. I stumbled upon and felt a sharp pain in my face and all over my side, my arms, and felt hot blood pouring down the bridge of my nose. My room was in shambles. I found the light switch and finally opened the door to my roommate, who had been outside the door shouting my name, banging as hard as he could, afraid to come in. I remember telling him I was okay after I opened the door, and I just needed a second. "Did you take some shit tonight?" he said, and I nodded as I reached for the bathroom light and steadied myself, observing the damage in the mirror. My face was utterly fucked. I'd hit it on the edge of the bed or the desk, probably scraped it along the carpet quite a bit, because I saw there was a wicked purple and red rug burn across my face. The bridge of my nose looked like it had been smashed against the sides of something sharp. My body was sore all over, countless scrapes across my arms and shins and a huge bruise on my hip. My head, which I must have banged several times, felt like a mass of throbbing lumps and still vibrated with the mechanical oscillation. I felt as if my body was a hologram and the image was still static, not yet fully manifested. As I staggered out into the kitchen, he followed me wide-eyed and frantic, asking me what was going on, shouting. I ran to the kitchen sink and started splashing cold water on my face and realised my roommate was holding a small kitchen knife, frightened. I asked him, in an obviously scared and confused voice, why he had a weapon in the first place, and if he could please just put it down. He said that he heard me screaming, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" over and over and over and over again, loud banging and crashing noises coming from my room all at the same time. He threw the knife into a drawer and offered me some water before I started to try and explain. After a few minutes of frantic explanation of what had just happened, he finally told me why he'd been holding the knife. He said he was scared because my screaming was replaced by a deep, demonic voice that he swore did not belong to me. And his exact words were that it sounded like the devil. I feel as if I know now what lies on the other side. Although the experience still frightens me to this day, I am happy I had it, even though it was singularly the most utterly terrifying thing I've ever felt. I feel now as though I've been given a second chance at this reality here, this consciousness and these series of moments that we call life. Now that I do know, the next time I go back to that place, I will be prepared. Anonymous, 4/29/15, written 18 hours after the experience.